So, time for some katha now. So, we'll get serious and get great inspiration from our esteemed speakers. So, I humbly request Her Grace Radha Mataji to come onto the dais, and I request Her Grace Sita Mataji to come onto the dais to introduce Radha Mataji to us.
Very, very honored and very, very blessed to have Radha Mataji. So I would like to give a little bit of an introduction about her. And actually she lives in United States, in San Diego, and she has come here just for a 1-year sabbatical of service to India. And we have been fortunate to get this opportunity to get her to grace this program. So I'll just give you a little bio about her. Radha Devi Dasi is a disciple of His Holiness Mukunda Goswami and has practiced Bhakti Yoga since the mid-1980s. She has served as a temple board member in New Govardhan, California, and New Vrindavan, West Virginia. Along with her husband Yudhishthir Das, she has been involved in congregational preaching since the early 1990s. She has a lifelong interest in issues concerning women and children and currently serves as ISKCON's International Vaishnavi Minister. Her past services includes work with ISKCON Communications and Child Protection Office, as well as congregational preaching. Radha Mataji is a graduate of Harvard Law School and practices law in the US with an emphasis on helping victims of domestic abuse. She is a trained peer counselor for domestic abuse issues and previously taught at Chapman University School of Law and the University of San Diego School of Law. And she and her husband are very senior preachers, and they have in San Diego started a very, very successful preaching program called as Bhakti Chakra groups, which was so immensely successful that they managed to transform Western people to become devotees and even come to the point of initiation. So we are very, very blessed to have you. Please give her a big hand and welcome her for today's program. And we'll start with the first seminar. Hare Krishna.
Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm already inspired. Oh, that's not. On their own initiative, to create Sangha for ladies is really inspiring to me. And so many ladies, you know? So I think it's going to be a few minutes before we're ready. Okay, ladies, if we can get ourselves sorted quickly, otherwise prasadam will be late, right? No one wants that. Okay, Srila Prabhupada is very pleased right now. He's looking at all of these ladies serving each other, and he's very grateful. So to the organizers for organizing, to all of you who have come, thank you so much. Thank you so very much. This is a huge thing. So this presentation is called Srila Prabhupada and His Daughters. And I hope to both bring Srila Prabhupada forward a little bit, but also to give some discussion to the idea of how do we serve as Vaishnavis. Because men and women are different, you know, and we're different for a reason. Right? But many times in our ISKCON communities, the role models are men, right? The Vaishnavas, which is fine. But it's just that if I'm a young devotee and I'm looking to see what my spiritual life, what my devotional service should look like, looking at the Prabhus doesn't always help me, you know? So we need to have Vaishnavi role models and support each other. And Srila Prabhupada was very, very grateful to his Vaishnavi disciples. He used to call the ladies his secret weapon, because you can send a man out, you know, to approach someone, to knock on a door and give a book. But many times people are hesitant, right? You know, who is this person? What do they want? Are they a threat to me? But if you send ladies out, it's so much easier, right? You know, especially young, beautiful ladies, you know, and most Vaishnavis are young, beautiful ladies, at least for some time in our lives. And so he said, you know, it's not accidental, it's not incidental that Vaishnavis came as well as Vaishnavas. You know, Krishna did not send these ladies by accident. They're an important part of our history. So when Prabhupada started this movement, he had to go all the way to America. And my husband calls America Malaysia Desh, right? The land of the completely fallen. And really, that's true. And when Prabhupada came, he went at first to the higher class of people, because some Indian swamis were having some success there. But he was the pure message, you know, the complete message of Krishna consciousness means giving up some things, right? And when you have a lot, it's hard to give it up. So these people struggled. You know, they appreciated him, but they weren't necessarily able to take this message. So Prabhupada, by Krishna's arrangement, ended up in the worst part of New York, around people who had dropped out of society. And many of them came from wealthy families, they were educated, but they were so frustrated with the emptiness of material life that they were looking for something new. And so they came to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was so patient and so tolerant. You know, someone described to me once that the devotees who were coming at first, some of them would sleep in the temple room because they were homeless, basically. And one morning, Srila Prabhupada is picking his way out, right, to go outside. And someone wakes up and says, "Swamiji, where are you going?" And Prabhupada says, "You know, I'm going to take care of my immigration papers." And they all said, "Oh, Haribol, Hare Krishna, Swami," and went back to sleep, right? That's not how we normally think that, you know, the disciple and the spiritual master should behave, right? But Prabhupada was so patient and so tolerant that he was willing to let them come along at their own pace. And why is that important? Because it tells us, first of all, that Srila Prabhupada is supremely merciful, right? Who wants to go and serve somewhere where people, you know, don't understand how to reciprocate? That's hard. It's hard. You know, our false egos can get in the way. But Srila Prabhupada was so focused on what does Krishna want. Krishna wants these fallen souls to be saved. He wants these fallen souls to come back to his feet. So whatever I have to tolerate, I will tolerate. And that's important because it tells us how we have to be when we try to share Krishna consciousness. So I hope that, you know, in this presentation we will learn to understand a little bit more about Srila Prabhupada. All right, so can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we are not just Vaishnavas, we are Gaudiya Vaishnavas. We are followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And one of the things that first attracted me to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the fact that he was a revolutionary. You know, we don't always think about that. But he was the first, instigator of civil disobedience in India, right? When the Chankazi said, you cannot chant the holy names, Mahaprabhu said, we're going down there. All of us are going, and we are going to bring our drums, and we are going to defy his order. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also brought this message that we are not the body, right? But that anyone in this lifetime can become a pure devotee of the Lord. The material qualifications do not stop bhakti. So the rules about who could chant Om, right? Who could approach the Lord? Who could do deity worship? These things are not subject. These things do not stop bhakti. Bhakti is higher than these things. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu brought this message. So when Prabhupada came to America, he's coming in the context of bhakti first, social considerations second, right? Social considerations are still very important, but bhakti also has to be in there. Vishaka Prabhu has a beautiful way of saying it, that our movement is traditional, but it is tradition illuminated by bhakti, okay? So I hope that this will become a little clearer as we go forward. And we can look at the next slide, please. Okay, so unity in diversity. Someone's going to need to read this. Is there another microphone? Because I can't see from here. So someone else will have to read the text, please. Oh, beautiful. Okay, perfect. That's okay. Yes, thank you. Okay, oops. Okay, unity in diversity. This is Srila Prabhupada writing in Chaitanya Charitamrita. It is not necessary that the rules and regulations followed in India be exactly the same as those in Europe, America, and other Western countries. Simply imitating without effect is called niyamagraha, not following the regulative principles, but instead living extravagantly is also called niyamagraha. We should not follow regulative principles without an effect, nor should we fail to accept the regulative principles. What is required is a special technique according to time, country, and candidate. So, as a young rebellious Westerner, I read this and thought, oh, I don't have to think about tradition at all. That's not true, okay? But what this does mean is that ours is a personal movement. Krishna is seeking to have a personal relationship with each one of us, so that what works for me may not work for somebody else, and I have to keep that in mind when I'm trying to share Krishna consciousness. Now, what did Prabhupada say about the role of women? So if we can do the next slide. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Is that the same slide? Yes. Girls who are living in New Vrindavan should be engaged in the following activities. 1, taking care of the children. 2, cleaning the temple kitchen, etc. 3, cooking. And 4, churning butter, from a letter he wrote in 1969. Sounds very traditional, right? And sometimes people want to read this and say, okay, ladies, these are your 4 activities. Go, right? So if you could just, yeah, okay, so we have the second quote there. A woman's real business is to look after the household affairs, keep everything neat and clean. The women should be sewing, in another letter. So we can go to the next slide. So he writes to Govinda Dasi, you have good writing capacity and good artistic ability. Now devote your life to chanting Hare Krishna, and if possible, write articles on Krishna consciousness, as many as possible, with your own paintings, and send it for publication to Back to Godhead. Okay? So which way are we meant to go? You know, you're at home, you take care of your family, you know, you churn the butter, right? Or wait, now you've got to write articles, you've got to do paintings, you've got to do other things. So which instruction do we follow? Next one. Next slide, please. Hridayananda Goswami likes to say, you can't use Srila Prabhupada to argue with Srila Prabhupada, okay? Srila Prabhupada didn't just say the women should be at home and churning butter, and he also didn't just say you need to do other things, you need to be a preacher, you need to be, writing articles. He said both of those things, right? So we have to understand Srila Prabhupada in the context of all of his instructions, right? And we have to look for the principle that underlies those instructions. Just like we have the analogy of the elephant, right? That the blind men come up with an elephant, and one touches the trunk and says, oh, the elephant is like a tree, like a snake. The other touches the tail and says, the elephant is like a rope. And another says, no, the elephant is like a tree, because he's touching the elephant's leg. But the elephant is all of those things. And you have to have vision to be able to see the whole elephant, okay? So Srila Prabhupada gave us a lot of principles, and then he gave specific instructions, specific instructions to different disciples. And that's how we have to approach our spiritual life. What are the general principles? And then what applies right now in the circumstance that I'm in? And that takes guidance. It takes Shiksha and Diksha gurus, but it also takes maturity and realization. So why am I so passionate about this subject? What you have on the screen there are pictures of my daughter when she was about 3 years old. So on the left side, you see her the way I would always like to see her. She's neat, she's clean, and she's reading Srimad Bhagavatam, right? I'm such a good mother. But then in the next picture, what do you see? You see the little wild lady. And my daughter was those two children. Both of those were legitimate sides of her name is Prema Bhakti. Very strong personality, very amusing, likes to make jokes, but also has a very serious side. And we were in the temple room one day. There was a kirtan going on, and I was standing in the back with the ladies. We all stood in the back in those days. And my daughter liked to go up and stand right in front of Lord Krishna, and usually she would go with her father, so it was fine. But that day she decided she wanted Mata to come with her to the front of the temple room. And she's pulling on my arm and pulling on my arm, and it's the middle of a kirtan, and it's noisy for one thing, and for another thing, I would like to be chanting, So I just quickly told her, no, the brahmacharis won't like it if I go up there. And she pulled away from me, and she looked at me, and she walked up to the nearest brahmachari and punched him in the leg as hard as she could. And I thought, okay, I'm not giving her the right message. That was a parenting fail. But I also thought, she's not the only little girl who has this strong personality, who has this desire, this fierce passion to be there with Krishna. So I'm okay standing in the back, it doesn't bother me. But what about her? What about these other little girls? What about older girls, who maybe just can't accept this? Are we making a welcoming environment, a supportive environment for all of the ladies to become Krishna conscious? And when my daughter was a little bit older, Radhanath Swami was talking to me, and I was, again, complaining about her passionate nature. And he said, she will never be a lukewarm follower of her parents' religion, right? So she's not the kind of person that will just go along, go with the flow, be mellow, and just be kind of Krishna conscious. If she's going to be Krishna conscious, it's going to be a wholehearted thing, because that's the kind of person she is. And Radhanath Swami helped me to understand that my job was not to squish that passion out of her, My job was to help direct it in the right way. And I often say that everything I've learned about preaching, I learned from raising children. You know, that this is the thing, that Krishna doesn't want every devotee to be like every other devotee. Krishna wants you, with your propensities and your talents and your inclinations, to offer service. So we need to both embrace our own talents and inclinations and use them in Krishna's service, but we also need to assist other Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, both, to do that. But as Vaishnavis, we have the special opportunity to do that for each other. Okay. So we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so when I joined ISKCON, at first, the impression I had of Srila Prabhupada is very much an awe and reverence kind of picture. You know, he's our founder acharya, he's a pure devotee, he's given us instructions, we follow them. But as I got to know more Srila Prabhupada disciples, I got a more nuanced vision. And I will say one thing about America, you know, it is a very tough place to practice Krishna consciousness, but there are a lot of Prabhupada disciples there, and that almost makes up for it. So in the beginning, ISKCON was a family. It was a very small group. You see this picture, that's Mukunda, now Goswami, and his wife, Janaki, leaning over Prabhupada, and Janaki is threatening to steal his passport so that he can't leave. And Prabhupada wrote to Janaki, "I always think of you as my naughty daughter. As you are remembering me, so I am remembering you. And in that way, we are never separated." And I always think that's such a sweet, sweet mood. That's Krishna, and that's Srila Prabhupada, and they're talking to us. That message is not just for Janaki, it's for all of us. That Prabhupada, you know, is our father, and he loves us, and he wants us to love him. All right. Next slide, please. So this is a statement from Narayani Devi, who was one of Prabhupada's disciples, and who just coincidentally recently became ISKCON's first Vaishnavi Diksha Guru. We are a movement that has had Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus from almost the beginning, you know. Janavamata was a Diksha Guru, but this is ISKCON's first Vaishnavi Diksha Guru. And what she says is, during the first 7 years in India, my husband and I were Radha Govinda's pujaris in the Calcutta temple. I was offering Mangalartik, the 12 o'clock artik, the 4 o'clock artik, and the evening artik. And I was dressing the deities, putting them to rest, making garlands, taking care of Tulsi, and sewing. We made 52 deity dresses. I also got to go out and collect. I slept 4 hours a day. In India, Prabhupada didn't discriminate between men and women. Women did deity worship in Bombay, Delhi, Hyderabad, and Calcutta. In every ISKCON temple in India except Mayapur. Women were doing all kinds of services: cooking, harinam, leading bhajans, preaching, purchasing deities for the temple. It was innocent in those days, informal and friendly like a family. Godbrothers and godsisters were so enthusiastic to chant and preach, so dedicated to Srila Prabhupada, we never thought about mixing together improperly. The feelings we had toward one another were not ones of hatred or inferiority or superiority, but of mutual respect. I joined because we all felt that Srila Prabhupada was our common father. So in the beginning, ISKCON was very small. There was not a whole lot of hierarchy. You know, Prabhupada was at the top level, and everyone else was just trying to serve him. So we don't necessarily want to imitate what they did, but we want to understand this principle that everyone has service to offer. everyone has a contribution to make, and that we have to treat each other with respect and love. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so Yamuna Devi, probably you're all familiar with Yamuna Devi, one of Srila Prabhupada's very, very first disciples. And she was known for her dedication to Srila Prabhupada. He empowered her to do a lot of things. She spoke publicly on Srimad Bhagavatam in his presence. She led kirtans publicly in his presence. He taught her deity worship. She was the first pujari in ISKCON. And he also praised her leadership abilities, encouraging her to work with the men when they were opening Krishna Balaram Temple, for example. But Srila Prabhupada also understood etiquette, and how men and women have to relate to each other in careful ways. And one pastime that Yamuna Devi used to tell really stands out for me, that she was in the habit of sitting right in front of Srila Prabhupada when he spoke, because she was so anxious to hear what he had to say. And when they came to India with Srila Prabhupada, when the American devotees came to India, I think it was a big eye-opener for many of them, because there's so much etiquette and courtesy and proper behavior here, and they had not seen this before. So they were very anxious to become, better devotees and to adopt this culture. So one of the men told Yamuna Devi, it's not proper for you to sit up in the front, right in front of Srila Prabhupada. He's a sannyas, you should have some respect and sit away. So she began to do this, because Yamuna was always humble. She was not somebody who would agitate for her rights. She was very humble. But Srila Prabhupada noticed that she was not sitting in front anymore. And when she was walking by his room one day, he asked her, Yamuna, you don't like to hear me speak anymore? Why are you not, sitting in your usual place? And she said, Prabhupada, the sannyasis told me I should not sit in front of you, that it's not proper. And when I heard this pastime the first time, I'm thinking, oh, Prabhupada's going to tell her that, bhakti is more important than these considerations, and, she should sit wherever she wants by her spiritual master, right? Obviously, that's the answer. But that was not the answer that Srila Prabhupada gave. He said, oh, and he nodded, yeah, that's correct, And Yamuna said, that was such a blessing for her. Now, how is it a blessing that, she has to be farther away from her guru, right? It was a blessing because she understood that she had to develop a relationship of service in separation with Srila Prabhupada, right? Because that intimate ras, I'm right here with you, Krishna, right? That's one ras. But a higher ras, right, is when the gopis are saying, Krishna, where are you? Krishna, where have you gone? Please, please. That's the highest ras, that service and separation. And Yamuna said she knew she had to develop that with Prabhupada. And because she did so, when Prabhupada left, she already was prepared to go on serving the rest of her life in separation, right? So again, Prabhupada is not all one way or all another way, right? It's according to time, place, and circumstance. Okay, next slide. Malati Devi. Has Malati Devi come to Hyderabad recently? Okay, we have to work on that. Malati Devi is also one of Srila Prabhupada's very first disciples, and she and Yamuna, Janaki, Mukunda Goswami, Shamasundar, and Guru Das, they're the 6 that went from the US to the UK and met the Beatles and started that whole part of ISKCON's history. So Malati had a lot of association with Srila Prabhupada, and one story she tells says a lot about Prabhupada. When they came to India, Malati was cooking for Srila Prabhupada, and she also had a 2-year-old baby. So as mothers, we know when you have a young baby, doing any kind of service is a challenge, all right? But this was ISKCON in the early days, so that challenges did not stop there, all right? They had just like one hut to live in. There's no kitchen. So they were cooking using buckets, right? You put the coals in the bucket. You know better than I do, but you put the coals in the bucket, right? And you build a fire and you cook. But there were only 2 buckets, okay? And one of the buckets she could only use for a certain amount of time before Prabhupada's servant came and got it, because he needed to give Prabhupada's bath water, right? So not only are you limited to cooking on 2 buckets outside over a, with open fire, but you can only use one of those buckets for part of the time. And not only was she cooking, but she had to go and buy the boga too. So she would start with the treasurer, and there was never enough Lakshmi, so she would have to argue with the treasurer to get the Lakshmi that she needed to buy the boga. And then she would have to take her daughter and go to the river and argue with the boatman about how much he's going to charge her to go over the river. Because even now, if you have white skin in India, in the rural areas, they charge you double or triple or quadruple, right? So she had barely enough money to get the boga, and then she's having to argue about the trip over. She'd go and buy the boga, and she'd have to bargain very hard because, again, they want to charge her extra, and she doesn't even have enough. And then go back over the river, right? And argue with the boatman again, and then go back and cook for Prabhupada and argue with the devotees about, no, I need this for this service right now, no, I need it, And then she said, every time she would go and give Prabhupada the prasadam, he would tell her, this needs a little more salt, this was cooked a little too long, this is a little dry, every time giving her this feedback. And she said she started to feel like she could never please him, and she was the worst servant, and she decided, I'm just going to tell Prabhupada I have to give up this service, right? So the day that she was going to tell this to Prabhupada, he called her into his room early and said, my godbrothers are coming for lunch, and he's giving her instructions, and she thought, okay, this is not a good day to tell him that I want to change my service. And just, okay, Prabhupada. So she, went through all the austerity, cooked the lunch, and then she was carrying Prabhupada's plate into him. His godbrothers are lined up, on the walls of the room. And she said when she opened the door, put her head in the doorway, she could feel the disapproval, right? Why is this young Mataji coming in here, right? And she said she pulled her, sari over her head so it covered her face. And she's holding the plate and kind of combat crawling on her knees and her elbows to bring the plate to Srila Prabhupada, and she put it down, and she's crawling back. And she heard Srila Prabhupada say to his godbrothers, yes, she cooks for me. And she would cut her throat for me, and I would cut my throat for her. So Srila Prabhupada knew that his godbrothers didn't always approve of the service that he gave to Vaishnavis, right? It wasn't traditional. But he was making the point that these disciples, as Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, they're special. And that his love for Malati was just as deep as her love for him. And Malati Prabhu said, after that, she never considered giving up the service. And she realized that when Prabhupada was saying, oh, more salt, too dry, that he was reciprocating with her. She had a desire to cook as well as possible for him, and he was helping her, So that's the kind of love that Prabhupada has for us. A lot of times we hear these stories and we think, oh, what an amazing devotee, she's so exalted, etc. Yes, that's all true. But we should understand that our goal is to become like her, right? So Srila Prabhupada wants us to have this relationship with him. Rukmini Devi is another early Prabhupada disciple. She joined when she was 16 years old. She had left her parents' home and was roaming around the US. Can you imagine if your 16-year-old daughter said, I'm leaving home and I'm going to go and, take rides from strangers and wander with my girlfriends and see what we find, That's the situation she was in. But Krishna was so kind, right? And she was so intelligent that she came into contact with Prabhupada's devotees and his books and surrendered to him. But she tells the story how when she was very new, I think she was 17 maybe at the time, or maybe even still 16, Prabhupada was speaking in San Francisco, and he said to the devotees, I want all of you to go out and open a temple. And she spontaneously blurted out, even the girls, Srila Prabhupada? Because as ladies, we don't always think, I'm going to go out and take charge, right? But he said, yes, even the girls, right? Because this mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's is so important. It is so vital to this world. We can't afford to say, oh, I'm a lady, I can't do that, right? Souls are suffering. Everyone in this world is suffering, and it just becomes more and more obvious that we're all insane. The planet is warming up. All of these disasters are happening. We know what's happening. We know what needs to be done, and we can't fix it because we're crazy, because Maya has got us so firmly in her grip, right? And that's just the tip of the iceberg on the suffering part, okay? So we have to be passionate like that about sharing Krishna consciousness with others, that even the girls, my job is to go out there, whether it's in my family, in my neighborhood, in my, playgroup of mothers, whatever it is, to share Krishna consciousness. Okay, so yes, thank you. Krishna Nandini, also disciple of Prabhupada. Krishna Nandini was brought to Krishna consciousness by her mother, Bhumata. Bhumata was a yoga teacher, and she started reading Prabhupada's books. And I think she had 6 children at the time, and they didn't really fit with the temple community. It was all, young people in their early 20s. None of them had children, right? So Bhumata had actually started writing independently to Srila Prabhupada. She didn't know she was supposed to go through the temple president. So she was writing to him, and he was writing back, right? And at one point, he was in Dallas, and Bhumata took her family to Dallas, and it's a very mystical story how they got there, but we don't have time to hear the whole thing. But they got there, and Prabhupada was getting ready to have an initiation, and Bhumata wanted to be initiated, and she wanted her older children to be initiated also. And the temple president in Dallas said, Prabhupada, I don't know these people. I don't know what their standard is. I don't know if they're ready. I can't recommend them. You should not initiate them. And Prabhupada met with Bhumata, and he did. He decided to initiate them, even though they didn't have a temple president's recommendation from Cleveland, where they started, and the temple president in Dallas didn't know them. And he told the temple president, wherever I see a spark of devotion, a spark of bhakti, I have to fan it, right? So this woman was so dedicated that she was, just by reading Prabhupada's books, she was inspired to take up bhakti yoga, to bring her children to Prabhupada and to beg for his mercy. And he said, I have to give her shelter, right? So that's the mercy Prabhupada is offering us. Next slide. Okay, Mandakini Devi. Mandakini's French, and she was introduced to Srila Prabhupada in the UK. And she's very sincere. But the thing that is most known about Mandakini is she's one of the first devotees who went to Russia and helped open the Russian yatra. It's a pretty amazing story how Prabhupada went to Russia because he was invited by a university to go and speak. He was going as a scholar. At that time, religion was forbidden in Russia. So the devotees were told, don't bring any literature, don't try to, share your religion with anybody. And they weren't not planning to bring any books at all, right? But Malati Prabhu, Shamasundar's wife, she just couldn't accept that Prabhupada could go somewhere and not bring a book, because everywhere the devotees went, they distributed books all the time, everywhere. It was a part of what being a devotee meant. So she snuck this Bhagavad Gita into her husband's luggage. He didn't even know it was in there. And by Krishna's mercy, when they got to customs and their luggage was examined, the customs officials didn't notice this book. Okay? So by Krishna's mercy, the first Bhagavad Gita gets into Russia, right? And in the course of, going to the university and meeting with the professor he came to see, Prabhupada also met this young man named Anatoly. And by that one meeting with Anatoly and reading that Bhagavad Gita, that one meeting with Srila Prabhupada and reading the Bhagavad Gita, Anatoly became inspired to become a devotee. Okay? So here's where Mandakini's memory begins. She was praying, my dear Sri Sri Landaneshvara, please have Srila Prabhupada ask me to say something difficult, and please remind me to say yes right away. Then I heard that Srila Prabhupada was in Russia with Shamasundar. I thought of Prabhupada's bravery. Russia was such a strange and terrible place. I myself would never want to go there. When he returned from Russia, Srila Prabhupada looked at me with a big smile and said, Mandakini? Yes, Srila Prabhupada? His tone was casual and familiar, like he was going to send me across the street to buy potatoes. He said, would you like to go to Russia and marry this boy, Anatoly? And she said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. So she had been praying, let me do something for Prabhupada, let me do something big. And he asked her, imagine if your spiritual master came and said, will you go to a foreign country and marry this person you've never met who's going to be the only devotee in the entire country? No. No, I would not. But she said yes, and she went. And sometimes we think, as women, we can't be brave, we can't be, outgoing. But in the right circumstances, that's what we're called upon to be. And that's why it's important that if you have those qualities, you cultivate them, right? If your children or your god sisters have those qualities, honor them, because we can use them for Krishna's service. All right. So next slide, please. What are the instructions of Prabhupada on women? What did Prabhupada want is what it boils down to. So what are we going to take away from this? Next slide, please. Okay, protection of women, Prabhupada. The protection of women maintains the chastity of society, by which we can get a good generation for peace, tranquility, and progress of life. And we all know Prabhupada said women should always be protected by their husband, their son, their father, right? And we hope that is always the case. But I'm going to add one more, and I'm going to say by the association of other Vaishnavis, right? This is Kali Yuga. Not everybody has a father or a husband that will protect them. So many times our sons, bless their hearts. There may be a reason why they can't protect us, right? So we have to protect each other. And in traditional society, women naturally protected each other because they were all part of the same family and they were all living together. We've gotten into this crazy lifestyle where everybody's, just mother, father, grandparents if you're lucky, right, and children. And then mother may be going out to work along with father, right? So we don't necessarily have that Sangha built into our lives. And for Vaishnavis, many times our families are not Vaishnavas, right? So we have to be that Sangha for each other. We have to be that family for each other. And sometimes that's challenging because We have so many other responsibilities. Or my own experience is that sometimes people don't recognize how advanced I am. The other ladies don't understand how advanced I am, and they don't want to take my instructions, right? For some strange reason, I don't know why. But it means I have to put my false ego in my back pocket, right? Okay. But it's important. It's really important. Okay. Next slide. So, Prabhupada emphasized marriage. And in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he says, the first duty of a chaste woman is to carry out the order of her husband, right? And let's be really clear, okay? If you have a husband, if you're unfortunate and you have a husband who's crazy or has some problem and he says, eat meat or stop chanting Hare Krishna, no, don't carry out that order, okay? But for 99% of us, right, we have husbands. And the thing about marriage and home life, I think sometimes, at least in the West, not here so much, but in the West, we've forgotten how important marriage and family life are, right? Like I said, everybody's out working, everybody's on a separate agenda, and you want to watch that, as India becomes influenced by the West. You really want to watch that because it's a very destructive tendency. And what the wife does is creates the environment for the whole family to be Krishna conscious. Now, I worked most of my life outside the home, and my husband, because he was working for the temple, he had more flexibility. And I would not recommend that, okay? We did that because that's what allowed us to do the most service. But it was very difficult. And the natural inclination of the mother, right, is to connect and build relationships and nurture. Our brains, our biology, it's different from men's. And part of the difference is we are focused on those things like nurturing and connecting and having relationships. Men's focus tends to be into the outer world, right? But that inner world is so important. And I think this is one of the main problems with Western feminism, which is that it focuses on bringing women into men's spaces, but it does not value the female spaces, right? You cannot have a healthy society without having healthy homes. You cannot have healthy children without somebody there to do the nurturing. Now, if that's the father of Hare Krishna, that's wonderful. The service needs to get done, whoever can do it. But the truth is, in general, women are better at that service. So for us to take responsibility for creating that sacred space, for having, doing the cooking so that everything the family eats is prasad, for keeping the deity worship going, this is a huge contribution, and Srila Prabhupada knew that. Now, next slide. Marriage is also a reciprocation, right? The king will respect all women as if they were his own mother, and he will treat his own wife as the other half of his body. That's Srila Prabhupada in the purport to Bhagavatam. So it's not just women, okay, you serve, you carry out the instruction of your husband, you do this, but also the respect and the protection have to be there. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, motherhood. This is another big area for women, right? It's a cliche, but we can become mothers. Men can't do that, right? And it's not just the physical act of having the child, but again, it's that bonding and nurturing that our bodies are primed for. And there's one letter, one Vaishnavi had written to Srila Prabhupada because she was a new mother, but she also had responsibilities for deity worship, and the temple president was kind of frustrated with her because the two things weren't going together very well. And so Prabhupada wrote to her, "I am simply surprised that you want to give up your child to some other persons. For you, child worship is more important than deity worship. If you cannot spend time with him, then stop the duties of pujari. These children are given to us by Krishna. They are Vaishnavas. and we must be very careful to protect them. They are not ordinary children, they are Vaikuntha children, and we are very fortunate we can give them a chance to advance further in Krishna consciousness. That is very great responsibility. Do not neglect it or be confused. Your duty is very clear. Okay? So the point that I want us to take away here is that being a mother is so important. It's really critical. We will not have a Krishna conscious society if there are not Krishna conscious mothers raising Krishna conscious children, right? And what does that mean for us? It means we have to become Krishna conscious, right? You can't give your children what you don't have. So we have to grab on to this bhakti process. We have to go deep into it. When I was a young devotee, I had a tendency to want to not read Prabhupada's books and just remember what other devotees were telling me. This is what's in Prabhupada's books, right? But no, I have to be responsible for my own spiritual journey. So we are asked to be mothers to the next generation of devotees. Take your spiritual life seriously. Okay. Confirmed. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so Prabhupada. Prabhupada's our founder acharya. What does that mean? It means that he adjusts things, right? We follow the scriptures, we follow the tradition, but Prabhupada adjusts things as necessary. And there are two things he did that are, new. One of them is the idea of brahmacharini ashrams. He got to America, there's all these unmarried girls, what do we do with them? We have them live in the temple where they're going to be protected. Now, brahmacharini ashram, no brahmacharini ashram, that's not the point. The point is Vaishnavi Sangha, taking shelter of each other, right? So when we have women in our community who are struggling, sometimes our tendency is to want to say, well, they're bad association, let's just kind of shove them off to the side. But we can also give shelter to each other, right? Now, don't try to give shelter to somebody who's going to drag you down. Okay, don't do that, all right? But if you can, be supportive. All right, and then the other is the Brahma Gayatri. Srila Prabhupada decided to give Vaishnavis not the sacred thread, but the Brahma Gayatri mantra, which is a new thing in our sampradaya, okay? And why is that important? Because Srila Prabhupada did it, And so we have to respect what he's done and honor it. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I'm very lazy in my Krishna consciousness. And so the idea that I don't have to chant these mantras, I can just let my husband chant these mantras. I don't have to be a responsible Brahmin. I can just let my husband be a responsible Brahmin, right? All I have to do is serve him and, I get credit for whatever he does, okay? And you can do that. That's absolutely bona fide. But if you're really passionate about serving Prabhupada, if you're passionate about serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then grab onto it with both hands, right? You chant the Gayatri mantra. You become a responsible Brahmin. You teach others. You share with others. Okay. And that leads into the next point. Next slide, please. Active service. All right? This is one of the things I take from all of these Vaishnavis who are Prabhupada disciples, and what they've shared with me is that Prabhupada had them 100% engaged, whether it was 100% engaged in raising their children, 100% engaged in traveling with their husbands and spreading Krishna consciousness, or 100% engaged in some other way. Prabhupada wrote to Himavati in 1969, in Bhagavad Gita we find that women are also equally competent like the men in the matter of Krishna consciousness movement. Please, therefore, carry on these missionary activities and prove it by practical example that there is no bar for anyone in the matter of preaching work for Krishna consciousness. So it's not so much the idea that you have to serve in this way or you have to serve in that way. In the US, we have women as temple presidents, very motherly, loving environments, right? You don't have to do that here. It isn't required, right? And I always felt like, well, I'm certainly not ever going to be a temple president. No, thank you. But what Prabhupada wants is that we give 110%. Sita Mataji and I were talking about that this morning, that we need to go out of our comfort zone for Krishna, right? To not just do what we know we can do, but to go farther, to do more. So male or female body doesn't matter, 110% for Prabhupada. I think we're going to skip this slide and go to the next slide, please. Let's keep going because I'm not even sure what that is. All right. One more slide. Okay, this one. Yes. All right. I'm going to sum up, this bhakti tradition, right? Prabhupada wrote, "You dance, she dances. You sing, she sings. You cook, she cooks. There is no difference. You are the same in Krishna's eyes." Women are equally valuable to Krishna, right? I mean, relative to Krishna, we are all female, right? He's the enjoyer. We're all the enjoyed, male or female body. Don't think that you have nothing to offer or that your offering is lesser just because you're in a woman's body. It's not true. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about Devahuti, all right? So Devahuti, what I was told when I joined, Devahuti is the ideal woman. You should strive to become like her, right? And she does go the very traditional route. She is a daughter, then she's a wife, and then she's a mother, right? So she's always under the protection of the natural protector of that particular age of her life. And she serves them. That's her dharma. She serves her husband so nicely. She suffers austerities when he says that's time to do that. No complaints. And he's very grateful to her because she's such a faithful, loving, and chaste wife. And then she's a wonderful mother. And then her son leaves her, right? What the heck? I thought we were supposed to be protected by father, husband, son, This is not just any son. This is an incarnation of Krishna. And he just walked out on his mother. So what's going on here, right? But she's still protected. How is she protected? She's protected by the spiritual knowledge that he's just given her, right? And I imagine this cannot have been, the ideal path that she saw for her life, that her husband was going to leave her and her son was going to leave her. Who anticipates that, right? But not only did she accept that shelter, right? Krishna, you've given me this knowledge now, let me take shelter of it. But she spread it to the rest of the world. Prabhupada says Kapila Dev gave this message to his mother and through his mother to the world. So again, what are we called upon to do? We are called upon to imbibe Krishna consciousness so deeply in our hearts that it can never be uprooted, okay? But also to give it to others, right? How we do that will depend on our own personal talents and inclinations. But that we can do it and that we should do it, that cannot be denied. All right, so last slide. A lot of the pastimes that I just described from the different Vaishnavis are contained in this book, A Bond of Love. This is a compilation of memories of all of the Vaishnavi disciples of Srila Prabhupada that Malati Prabhu could track down. It's over 600 pages. It's that quintessential mango, no matter where you bite into it, it is sweet, it is nectar. So to make advancement in Krishna consciousness, getting the mercy of Srila Prabhupada is really important, right? And if you want to get the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, you have to get to know Srila Prabhupada, okay? So we do that by reading his books. That's very important. But we can also do that by hearing from his disciples, hearing from his associates. There's so many memoirs There's a whole video series, Srila Prabhupada Memories, but now there's also this book. And because this is the Vaishnavese, it has that emotion, that heart, you know, the loving feeling of bhakti comes through in their recollections. So it's available at bookrightspress.com, but it's also available on Amazon India. And I think it might be a little cheaper there. So thank you all so much for listening so patiently. I don't know if there's time for questions. Do we want to take questions? Okay, are there any questions or comments? Corrections? Yes. Is there a microphone?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
My humble obeisances, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Mataji. It was really, really inspiring. I'm very grateful to you because you covered everything comprehensively. You did make a point that how one needs to apply, whether the traditional way or not so traditional way of applying Prabhupada's instruction, it depends on Shiksha, Diksha and maturity. So when does one realize that one is matured enough to apply the specific instructions given by Srila Prabhupada? Hare Krishna.
Thank you. That's a very good question. You know, how do we know when we're mature enough to to figure out our own way? I don't know how we know that. I know how we know when we're not mature enough to figure it out, because we try something and we fall flat on our face. Okay. For me, that's what maturity means. It means I've made so many mistakes in my life that I have a pretty good sense of where I'm likely to fall down again. So, you know, take instruction from senior devotees. That's very, very important. But also know that if you make a mistake, you know, if you try something and you realize, oh, I'm in over my head, or, you know, this is not conducive, you know, maybe I made an offense inadvertently to a devotee, it's okay. You know, we just acknowledge, okay, that wasn't the right thing to do. I'm very sorry. Let me make amends and let me try again. You know, sometimes we think if I make a mistake in Krishna consciousness, everything is finished, right? Because this is so important to us, right? Offending devotees is such a dangerous thing. But if we're sincere and we take the humble position, we will be okay. Thank you. Okay.
Any other quick questions? If not, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your attention. Such a wonderful Sangha.
Thank you so much, Radha Mataji. Thank you so very much, Radha Mataji, for your, you know, we hear about Prabhupada, but, you know, when we hear from, you know, direct disciples of Prabhupada, your first-hand knowledge, that's very, very valuable to us, Maji. Thank you. Maji, could you hold on for 1 second? We request you to accept a little token of gratitude from us, Mataji. We request Modini Mataji to give this. And some cow products, Mataji, that the women made.